Good morning. We're live at Expert35. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, and as promised, bringing you 35 different experts from 35 different industries, talking about the challenges, the opportunities, and the hardships. Well, today we're going to be talking about college opportunities because we're bringing back one of our OG experts, Judy. Judy, thanks for being on the show with us again today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Gabriel.
Oh, always a pleasure. Things are shaking up in the college world. So I think it's going to be an incredible amount of information. We've got a lot of teachers, we've got a lot of students. Nobody better than somebody that helps students get to college and even in higher education. It's all about looking, being, showing who you are. And really grateful to have you today, Judy. Thanks for being on the air. Before we jump into it, text Expert35 to jump on the air. You can ask questions. Judy's going to ask us tough questions. While we don't know what they're going to do in the application process, Judy knows all the ins and outs on how to make sure you stand out. So if you want to learn more about Judy, she's Expert49. And she'll be happy to kind of walk you through the process of what's the next step. So, Judy, man, it's been a crazy couple of months since last we had you on the show. Rules are changing. The goalpost is moving. Kids are scared. Tell us, what is going on?
So I'm going to answer that broadly to begin with. So on the one hand, while everything's changing, the colleges are still looking for you. What's a little trickier now is everybody's in a dark room and it's harder to see each other. So if you keep that in mind, you'll understand they still want you to do all the things that you were doing. You just may have to do it differently. Does that make some sense? So they're still looking for the kids with the strong grades, strong test scores, if you can get them, the extracurriculars. So keep doing the things you were doing. And we talked about this before we got on the air. Don't take your foot off the gas because they're still out there looking for you.
So true. Now, Judy, tell us a little bit. How did you get into this? Because you've got all kinds. You've lived all kinds of lives, and you're from the Caribbean, and now you're helping all these students get to college. Man, give us a little bit of background on how this all began.
So I call it my Eddie Murphy story. So I moved from Jamaica with my parents when I would have been a sophomore at home, but when I got to the U.S. It sounds sort of stupid now, but they skipped me a year and I didn't realize. They just said, "Oh, sit in this class," and I sat there. It wasn't super hard, so it was okay. But then I realized in October, somebody said, "Oh, so are you taking your SAT?" which I'd never heard of in my life. I'm like, "What's an SAT?" And this is October, right? So I go in, I take the test cold. Absolutely don't do that. Terrible idea. But anyway, I aced the stupid thing, and I was very lucky. I ended up at the University of Pennsylvania. And the funniest thing was that I remember them. But first of all, I didn't realize I could be rejected, right? Because in Jamaica, we have one school, and you're pretty much going there. So I remember they called and said, "Well, do you want Wharton or the nursing school?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, which is a harder one to get into?" And they said, "Well, Wharton is." I said, "Okay, well, sign me up for that." I thought I was just signing up because I thought, well, I guess if I don't like it, I could just drop back to something else. So anyway, this is not how you should do things. This is not how I advise people. But this is my Eddie Murphy story. Do not do this at home, friends. But anyway, that was my story. I was very lucky, but it's all about information. And by the time I had my own kids, I started realizing, oh, wow, this is actually a really competitive process. And it's helpful to have an expert to help you do that. And so, I had a career in business, but then later on, after my kids left home, I started doing this and I love it. I love helping kids get the information, find their potential. I mean, just like you end up at Rice and it's a life-changing experience potentially, right? So that's what I like doing, is seeing lives change and helping kids get where they're supposed to be and figuring out how to get there.
Right. It's so interesting, right? To know that the world's changing, the world, the way we can interact is different. What are the options for just differentiating yourself moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. It comes right back to what I said in the beginning. The colleges are still looking for the same kids. So, it's still important. Differentiate just means, how do I stand out in this pool of thousands of applicants? So the answers are the same, but they're done differently. So you still need strong grades. So whatever that means in the context of your high school, you want to do as well as you can in your courses. We keep talking about this phrase, but don't take your foot off the gas. Testing, if you have the option to test, you should test. If you can't, that's okay. The colleges understand that. Extracurriculars, here's what could be quite different. They don't want you to, I mean, they don't want to hear, well, gee, I was in soccer and I just can't play soccer. We understand that. So what have you been doing instead? And this is where you have to be creative, right? So let's say you were in sports, because we talked about this. I played soccer, I can't play soccer now. Why do they even care that you're doing these extracurriculars? And cut me off if I'm going off topic of what you were asking me, but it's doing all the same things you're looking at, but doing it differently. So in that example of soccer, that's great. You can't play soccer. I understand that. But what can you do now to show leadership, to have impact in your community? Because that's still important, right? Because in some ways, that's what you were doing through soccer, weren't you, right? So now I just look at other ways that I can show them that. So you have to look for alternatives. Does that make sense? You
Yes.
still have to be in touch with your teachers, because you're going to need recommendations. It's no time to go, oh, I can't be bothered with my homework. No, I mean, those teachers still need to support you. So all the same factors are in place. They just may look a little different. And believe me, just by keeping your foot on the gas, that is differentiating, because a lot of kids have completely just dropped off the map.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's easier to get in. I'm simply saying, don't stop looking at the things that have always been important, because they're still important, and you can still differentiate yourself in every single one of those areas. Just like some kids letting their grades go, don't do that. Does that answer your question? So the standing up, looking stronger than your peers and making better decisions, or the best decisions you can under your circumstances. That's always the case. They're always looking at what did you do with opportunities you had in front of you. That's the question.
Right. There's a lot of great questions coming in. Greg's asking, are institutions with prestige more desirable under the current admissions cycle?
I'm not sure I understand the question, so I'm going to interpret it. If the question is, are institutions more desirable, like desirable for whom? I'm not sure I quite understand.
Well, is it more important now?
But from a job's perspective?
Maybe from a job's perspective, or
yes. Okay, so let me answer that two ways. So I would always say, keep as many doors open as you can for as long as you can. And what I mean by that is all those factors we just talked about. You would like to be the strongest applicant you can so that you have options. It's not simply a matter of saying, oh, is a prestigious institution important? But what is important is making sure that institution is going to be there 5 years from now, because there are institutions that are not going to make it through COVID, and you don't want to graduate somewhere and you have no alumni peers, right? For example. So it's not simply, oh, it's prestigious, but it could be that these places that are considered prestigious are also financially sound. That's sort of a combination that you're looking at. Does that make sense? So it's not the prestige in and of itself, it's the, how whole is this institution going to be? And those two things could in some cases go together. Not always, but sometimes. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. We're having a little bit of trouble. I'm going to show my video. I'm going to stop my video. There we go. My video is not showing for some reason. So that's maybe a satellite. We got question for Jennifer, and I think this is kind of what we're starting off with, is when should students start the process of going to college and applying? And this is like step 101.
Jennifer's asking me the trick question where everybody gasps. So here's the reality. The actual process probably starts freshman or sophomore year. As far as, starting to put the pieces in place for college. But what I will say is that if you're going after a very highly selective college, one of the Ivies, Stanford, something like that, you probably want to be aware of the issues that will matter in about 7th grade. And the reason I say that is there are just a lot of decisions that you make around course selection that are either opening doors or closing doors. So, for the average person, I'd say freshman, sophomore year, but if you're aiming pretty high, you probably want to understand what things are impacting your opportunities in 7th or maybe 8th. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Barbara Blades has a great question. It's like, is it going to retake the PSAT and SAT for a higher score? Is it good doing that?
Generally speaking, yes. And what you're going after, the PSAT, think of that as a precursor to the SAT. The colleges will not see your PSAT, so it's your SAT you want to worry about. So typically, you any student is going to probably need to take the SAT about 3 times, assuming they're studying in between and doing what they need to do to get to their best score. After about 3 times, you're probably going to level off. And again, this is assuming you're doing what you should be doing in between. So again, that gets back to planning. That means that if you start, just before senior year, you're going to run out of runway. So that's where the planning comes in. You want to probably start whenever you've had Algebra 2, you're ready to start studying for the SAT. So that could be the end of sophomore year summer, or it could be the beginning of the junior year. So you have enough runway to take it a few times. So yes, that answer is absolutely yes.
And they're asking what is changing, right, in that process. How do the SAT and tests work now? Because obviously the schedule's changing. So what are you seeing in the shifts? That's from Jennifer Johnson, by the way.
I love Jennifer Johnson, always giving me thought-provoking questions. So the question was, what do I see changing around testing broadly? So it's 2 pieces. One is there's been a major shift recently in that they've gotten rid of subject tests, which some people may not have known existed in the first place, and they're not going to have the essay within the SAT. So that's one structural change. But on the other hand, while colleges understand that you may not have a test, I can tell you from many students I work with, many students still do have a test. So if you have the opportunity, it certainly gives you the opportunity to frame your application differently. That's not to say you should put yourself in harm's way to try to take a test, but you shouldn't just say, oh, tests are not important anymore. No, if you can get one, you should probably do it if it's safe. Does that make sense? So that's what's a little different. Tests are still helpful if you have them. So that has changed, but they're not mandating that. On the other hand, they are test optional, but they can be very helpful. Was that for answer?
Yeah. Absolutely. Now let's talk about the big one, right? Financial needs are obviously changing as COVID shifts, right? What are the latest opportunities on scholarships, or how do you go about it now?
Yep, that's a great question. So the way I always advise people comes back to being a strong applicant, and here's why. Most of the money you get is going to be from the college under a positive scenario. So let's say, what will happen is, now there's some colleges that will not give any merit aid. That varies by college. They will only give money to people who show financial need, so they'll get money from the government basically. But that being said, if you're a strong applicant for a school and you're at the top of their class, you are more likely to, assuming they give merit scholarships, you're in better shape to get a merit scholarship from them. Think of it that's your main meal. Scholarships should be what fills in the gaps. I mean, I know you hear about scholarships that cover everything, but that money to cover everything is generally going to come from the college itself. So your best answer is you want to be the best applicant you can, and you want to make sure you apply to a range of colleges, including colleges where you'll be a very strong applicant and be more likely to get aid. In terms of external scholarships, ones outside the college, they are always competitive. You always have to apply to a ton of scholarships to get any money, and that is probably on steroids now because so many people make money. So you should shift it and think in terms of being a strong applicant, applying to the right schools where you can get solid aid from the college. Does that?
Yeah. No, and Barbara's got a great question. Do you ever get applicants or people that you help that are already in college and they're unhappy and they just want to go through and change?
Yes, absolutely. Those are transfers, and we do work with transfer students as well.
What's the process now for what are opportunities to differentiate yourself? Like you're saying, if you don't have the sports, because we talked that offline, saying, that was my path, was sports, right? What if you don't have the sports? Like, how can you show impact and how can you make that happen?
Yep. So let me talk about in general terms, because I still have kids getting into, we talked about this, Rice, getting into the Ivies, getting into great schools, UT, etc. So, how did those kids look any different as a broad spectrum? They had solid grades. They didn't let their grades slip. Most had tests. I think there was maybe one who did not. And if you don't have a test, I mean, the reason that matters, right, is that the college then has less context, right? If 2,000 of us all have A grades, you and I know that schools are different, and that's not the same performance for all of us, right? Depends on the school you're at. So that's where tests are helpful as an objective measure. But in any case, so academically, they were strong. Yes, their extracurriculars got canceled just like everyone else. One of the kids I worked with, actually, he decided to be a volunteer for one of these health tests where they were testing COVID vaccines. So he wanted to do something in medicine and computers, actually, but that was his way of contributing to the community. So kids are just finding interesting ways. I had another kid who actually was featured on TV because he set up a whole STEM program for fourth graders. STEM is his passion, that's his thing. And he was picked up by the media because of it. So yes, that's going to set you apart, right? So it's finding new ways to do the things you love and impact your community. I mean, I know that's a little broad, but it takes a little ingenuity right now. And that's
absolutely. Great question from Jennifer Johnson. I'm going to throw my photo on there. I think we're having video technical difficulties, but
wait, with me?
No, me. My video's not even showing. So some people are telling me like they just see a blank space. But okay. What is it? I love Jennifer's question. Like, if you really, tried in a subject, but you still didn't do well, right? Like, what are your options? And what if that's that's like a career path that you're interested to? Like, what do you suggest somebody with that aspiration?
So that's a difficult question. I mean, I guess my first question would always be, like I never wanted to be an accountant. That's not my thing. God bless all the accountants out there. They're wonderful. I'm glad they exist. But if it's something you didn't do well in, okay, so there are different reasons for not doing well. But if you didn't do well because you don't like it, or it was super hard for you, I guess at some point you have to evaluate, like, do I want to spend the rest of my life doing math if I'm not good at math? Now, if the issue is, I had a family emergency, I had family, so it depends on what the reasons were. If it's, I had something going on in my family, but I really love math, I'm great at it, then that's where you would maybe get a guidance counselor to write a letter to explain what was happening. So it depends on the circumstance. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Go with it, I guess. But again, that's kind of a general answer, but it depends on the particular circumstance.
This is a great question. It's like, what qualifies as showing authenticity and resilience when colleges look for those traits? So what do you think they're looking for?
Well, let me tell you what shows them that you don't have that. So for example, and this is really classic because I used to interview for Penn for a long time, and somebody would come in and go, oh, I totally want to do medicine. Okay, that's great. Well, but you've taken none of the courses that you'd need, and none of your extracurriculars show me that you have any interest in that. I mean, I don't say that to them, but I'm just saying, if you're telling me you want to be a doctor and you've never set foot in a hospital, that doesn't look right. You see, so is it consistent? That's the word I would use. That's for the authenticity. Is it consistent with the other things that you're showing me? Because remember, while you're telling me you want to be a doctor, I can still see the courses you've taken, all art. I can see your extracurriculars have nothing to do with medicine. You see, so it's more obvious than people think, when you're looking at the whole thing. And resilience, I call it, what did you do with what was handed to you? So it may not be impressive that, whatever, I got a 1500 on the SAT. It may be super impressive that someone else got a 1400 and their circumstances were so difficult, what they had to go through to get that. You see, so what did you do with what you have? Kind of a stewardship question. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, and I think what we're really working. Okay, we're gonna try this one more time. Let's see if my camera comes on. Greg's kind of setting me the axis. It's like, it's so interesting thinking about the goalpost is moving, right? Things are changing so quickly that, how do we make, there we go. I'm just going to throw that in there. I think that's the easiest way to do it. That's me. Like, what are the opportunities, right, moving forward? So my favorite part of the show is we say, like, hey, what are 3 things we should do now? So go for it.
Yeah. So let me shift a little bit what you said. What's not changing is the goalpost. The colleges are still looking for the same kids. And that's why we have this whole conversation about don't take your foot off the gas. Because as I said to you, kids are still getting into Rice, UT, all these colleges, Texas A&M, they're still getting in there, right? So what are the 3 things you should do? The first is grades. That's super important. And it's difficult, right? Because everything's virtual, everything's changed, but, keep going for your grades. It's going to be really important. If you can test. But if you can't, what you need to think about more broadly is, how can I show them how strong I am academically? And that could mean I take some, free classes online. Maybe I do something through a community college. How can I show them I'm a strong student? That's what you're trying to do. So grades, scores, if you can get them, or something else that shows them your academics, and extracurriculars. Be creative, think through, I want to be a doctor. How can I show them I'm still interested in medicine and helping people, even though I can't volunteer at a hospital? What can I do instead? So those are the things. And this is a fourth, but I'm going to throw it in anyway. Keep positive, because it's been such a difficult year for so many people in so many ways. So stay as positive as you can. Do something good for yourself and for someone else every day. That's really important right now, just to keep your spirits up, because for a lot of kids, it just feels like, this never-ending void. So do everything you can just to keep a smile on your face. That's important now.
Great information. I love the question from Jennifer. We're going to throw one more question in there, because she says, what about emotional toll, right? Do colleges consider how that might affect the grades, right? I think, is there an adjustment for that?
So the adjustment is that, MIT now has something close to like 30 questions. I mean, they have so many colleges have so many opportunities for you to tell them what's going on in your life. So that is how they consider it. They don't just automatically go, everybody's under stress, just move it down a notch. They are looking at every application. So they're going to look at what were your challenges and how did you deal with them. And also, of course, your guidance counselor can, insert on your behalf, here's what, Freddie was going through, just so you understand the context, right? So that's how they take it into account. It's very much on a one-on-one basis.
Judy, so great having you on the show. I love the information. It seems like it gets harder and harder to go to college, and then all of a sudden COVID throws it into the mix.
But on the other hand, Gabriel, what you have to think is, wow, this is great, COVID. Half my competitors are going to fall right off the edge, and they have. So this is your time to shine. You have to look at it differently. You really do.
Thank you so much. I think the information you're giving us is so timely. It's so important to kind of look at, the full spectrum and how to shift and how to be resilient. So we got more questions on it. We're going to let you go onto the chat and answer those questions, as people really are intrigued and scared. And I think you kind of shown us that there is opportunities for differentiating and stay positive. Thank you again so much for being on the show today.
Thanks so much, Gabriel, and thanks everybody for being here. Have a great day.
All right, Judy, we're going to let you off the air real quick. There you go. That is Judy with College Excellence. If you want to get a hold of her, text Expert39 and you'll get a firsthand introduction to how to get to college, how to get those grades up, how to make sure you differentiate yourself. And we just couldn't be luckier to have somebody like her on the show. We'll be back on Wednesday. Guys, if you know anybody, text Expert35. See you soon.
We collaborate at Expert35. This is for a better tomorrow and a better today. Let's come together, and together we will find a way. You got questions, we got solutions. You got problems, we got resolutions. Visit Expert35.com. No need to worry, just remain calm. No more pain, no more